This is Modern Mindset, the show where we discuss the psychology and emotions of business. And joining me on today's show is Richard Stead from Cures Healthcare and the founder of Ocean, an alternative to antibiotics. And tell me a bit about how you found yourself in this industry and the story that led up to Ocean.
Right, that goes back about 40 years when I started selling chemicals with my background in chemistry into the food industry, and I was selling everything: flavors, colors, acidulants and preservatives. And in the last 20 years I'd been looking more into preservatives, which are not pleasant things. We shouldn't be doing things to preserve our bodies. And I started looking at how nature protects itself, and it was fascinating, the things that nature can do. And then spending more time on fruits and not the skins, the things that are in the skins of fruit that help them fight infections and bacteria, quite extraordinary, which helps keep preserving them. And if the skins of fruits have got something, maybe the skins of humans and animals have got something, because the skin is the biggest part of our immune system, and it does a fabulous job. Nothing can get through it, nothing passes it. Moisture, viruses, bacteria, they don't get through. But there are holes in the skin, of course, so there's like our mouths, our backsides, our eyes. There must be something there that's as competent as the skin at keeping infections out, pathogenic materials, keeping them out. And sure enough, there is. In our saliva and in our tears, there's a most phenomenal molecule, an ion, that can instantly kill off pathogenic bacteria, pathogenic viruses, pathogenic yeasts. It's instant. It's there. Nature developed it to fight off these low levels of things that we would have on our fingers as we rub our eyes or pick our teeth. With a bit of, or something that's in the air, listeria that's floating around in the air, or salmonella comes into our tears, but we don't get infections. It's very rarely that people get infections in the mouth or in the eyes. So this thing is phenomenally successful at keeping pathogenic bacteria and viruses and so on out of us.
So the body has almost like a natural defense mechanism in place.
It does indeed. It's part of what we call the innate immune system. By that, it jumps into action automatically. We don't need to do anything. It does it instantly and quickly, a bit like a reflex action, you might say. Yes.
And I guess that kind of changes, depending on the environment that the particular individual is in. It kind of adapts.
No, it doesn't need to adapt. The saliva, the technology, the chemicals are in the saliva and in the tears and in the vagina and so on, that when low levels of these pathogenic materials try to get in, they can't. It jumps into action immediately and does its job, which is to kill off these very tiny microorganisms that can cause us so much trouble.
And from what I understand, you're very passionate about seeking and exploring alternatives to antibiotics, and even the head of the various health organizations way up to the World Health Organization have raised the concerns of a reliance on antibiotics. Why is there such a high level of concern around antibiotics?
Because these bacteria that we have used antibiotics to kill off for the last, it's almost 100 years since Fleming discovered the first antibiotic, which was penicillin. But bacteria are very clever. They will do what they can to try and keep living, and so they developed a resistance against penicillin. Fortunately, every 10 years or so, there was a new type of antibiotic came along. So where penicillin wasn't working, we could use something else, and then 10 years later, something else. There are mainly 6 classes of antibiotics that work in 6 different ways and so on. But these bacteria have developed resistance to more than one of these systems. And now we're at the stage where some infections, there's almost no antibiotic that can treat them because they've developed such good resistance. A typical one is gonorrhea, which we all thought had disappeared. But no, it's one of the fastest growing problems. There are 50 million people that are suffering today with gonorrhea, new cases almost every year, because there is no antibiotic that actually works against them anymore. 70 countries have nothing to fight gonorrhea because they've developed resistance. Clostridium difficile we know of, tuberculosis, and so on. These are serious things that are real killers and come on quickly. We've got no antibiotics that are fighting against them. And that's why the UK health authorities, the World Health Organization, and so on, are so desperate to find an answer to antibiotic resistance.
And what we're hearing about this kind of, almost a antibiotic apocalypse, is that just media sensationalizing? Is it really that serious, our reliance on antibiotics?
We need a stronger word than apocalypse. It is a huge problem. At the moment in Europe, it's said that there are 25,000 people a year at least that die from an infection for which there is no antibiotic. The same number in the United States. And it's expected to grow and grow and grow until there's 500,000 people a year die worldwide from infections for which there is no longer an antibiotic. Very soon it will be the case that everybody in the UK will know somebody, a friend or a neighbour or a member of their family who have died from an antibiotic-resistant infection. That's how serious it is becoming. And so we've got to find alternatives to them, not another antibiotic. Lots of antibiotics, the new ones that come along, are just derivatives from a previous one, and resistance can be developed quite quickly by these bacteria. So they're short-term. We need something that is not an antibiotic. Antibiotics started off from nature. They found them in soil because certain bacteria were releasing or creating what is now called an antibiotic to stop a battle between from another bacteria. But bacteria are clever things. They will do what they can to stay alive, to protect themselves. And so over time they develop this resistance. And now antibiotics, no new antibiotics or classes of antibiotics have been identified for over 30 years. So we've got a serious problem. Very few people are working on developing new antibiotics. So if we can drop the word antibiotics and say antimicrobials, there's not new things about. Just so few. There's 14 antibiotics in trial process at the moment, something like that, of which over half of them are just derivatives of existing antibiotics. So they will be very short-term. And based upon statistics, if the other half are truly effective and something new, only 3 of them would ever make it to market because statistics show that things fall at this hurdle, this stage, this part. So there's not enough work being done. Large pharma has turned away from fighting infections because there is not enough money in it for them. That
was going to be my question, actually, because I imagine with time running out and the size of the problem, that's going to be kind of proportionate to the size of the market and the size of the value in finding a solution to this.
I might be unfair to large pharma in saying that there's just not enough money in infectious treatments because you get an infection today, you take their medicine that works against that infection, and you take it for a week or 2 weeks. Much better that that you have a heart condition your drug can be used every day for the rest of my life. That's what they're into. The amount of money that people are prepared to pay for an infectious agent is very limited. Look at the price for they pay just a few pounds for a strip of penicillin or tetracyclines at the moment. But there are some very expensive ones coming out. There's a new one for helping to fight, I think it's urinary tract, where they'll pay £80 for it. And some real big ones, they'll pay thousands, tens of thousands of pounds per dose. But these have to be mixed up and injected. It can only be used in hospital environment. So they're having to pay a lot more money for these things. But they are going to be used small amounts. And so there's no money in it for the big pharma, who would spend several billions to develop something and maybe never ever get their money back. So it's left, therefore, to SMEs, companies like myself.
Who's picking up the mantle? Here, if big pharma, with all of their resources, all of their research and development, are not looking at what could be, an apocalyptic scenario, Is it these kind of innovative, smaller companies that are, kind of taking up this challenge?
People like myself, yes, we are the ones that are going to have to do it, because big pharma won't be doing it. Too much time and energy would be required by big pharma. Whereas we get a small company like myself, and we're dedicated to something, we can see it a certain way along the line to bringing it to market. But then we run into resource problems, resource of people, resource of premises, resource of finance, and so forth.
And that leads naturally to the kind of the question of how important is investment in this industry at this point, to give you and other companies like you the resources to really solve what is becoming a global problem.
Well, we've gone quite a long way down the line from identifying the molecule and that works. And every infectious organism that we've tried it against, it has worked and destroyed them. And we've got to the stage where we had one clinical study in humans. Just over 50 patients were given the product. And this was upper respiratory tract, which, as we know, is mainly viral rather than bacterial. 80% of those are viral. And upper respiratory tract normally would last 4, 5, 6 days. And people would take time off work, and which is extraordinarily expensive. It costs, in the United States, there's over 100 million days a year lost through people not able to go to work because of upper respiratory tract infections. It's a huge number also in the UK. And that costs the individual, the company, and the health service phenomenal sums of money. So that's why we've looked at that, and we've had a trial in that. And of the 50-plus patients, over 80% of them felt that they were fit enough and well enough and symptoms reduced enough that they could go back to work 24 or 48 hours later. Instead of it lasting up to 6 days, it was almost eliminated, not quite, but almost overnight.
And that sounds very promising, early kind of figures. What kind of, obviously these days compared to, let's say, 10, 20 years ago, there's lots of different ways of seeking finance and investment. What kind of ways as the chief executive of your company are you looking at so that you can find that investment?
Well, I've looked at grant money, but the grants, considering that antibiotic resistance is such a huge target market for governments worldwide, nobody's putting any money into it. There's a grant application through in Innovate UK at the moment, and they're looking for ways of diagnosing or developing new treatments and so forth. And so we go into a competition, and they've put a huge sum of money, £14 million. And if we win some of that, we would get maybe $1 million, probably less than that. And when people talk that it costs several billions to develop a new drug, how far is the government going to help us go? No distance at all. And many investors say that, again, just like large pharma, there aren't enough chances to have these products prescribed because it's short-term treatment and not long-term treatments. But we've looked at it in a different way. There's antibiotic resistance that we can overcome. There are antivirals that we can produce, and so we can kill viruses. And there are the number of people that get sick every year because of antibiotic resistant and with upper respiratory. There are worldwide almost 20 billion cases of upper respiratory tract infections worldwide. And up to 15% of the population are infected with a URI every year, and 10% of adults, 30% of children catch flu every year, and there are up to 500,000 deaths a year from flu and coughs and colds. So the numbers of people are huge for us. For an SME, it's a huge number. Don't have to talk of the same number as a big pharma would talk about. So in the UK, 27 million days lost, and it costs us billions of pounds. 1.3 billion pounds it costs the UK government every year, and businesses. And in the USA, it's $7 billion a year it costs. If we could take a portion of that as an SME, it's a phenomenal number. And even if we got a low percentage, say 4%, 5%, it's phenomenal numbers. So investors, were they to come in with us, the sooner we get the investment, the sooner we can get to market, they would get a very good return, and quite quickly. Different return than Big Pharma is looking for, different investment level than Big Pharma is looking for. But look at it from an SME, and an SME that, if we could come with this to the market, would grow very, very quickly, because there's nothing else out there that will kill viruses. We're probably the only one. I don't know of any others, but I'm sure there's something out there. I don't know of any others that have something quite like ours.
So there is a dissonance at the moment. The government, the health authorities are saying this is a major problem, yet there isn't the financial backing or investment into the smaller companies that are actually taking on this challenge that Big Pharma is kind of avoiding. So therefore, do you think it's down to private investors to kind of step in where government grants and kind of other sources of investment are lacking?
I'm afraid it is, yes. Government has put large sums of money into what they call the antibiotic resistance laboratories and so on that they built in Cheshire and Warwickshire. But these organisations are again looking at Big Pharma to come in and use their facilities. And they are very expensive places to use. So again, it's something that's like a barrier to an SME. And we can't afford to go to them. They are not with the finances that we have. All of the finances that we've done so far have come from myself, and I've been working on it for a long time. And now I've got a plan of the things that we need to spend money on. We need about 10 to 12 million pounds, and that would take us to having carried out a second clinical trial, which would be needed, and whichever condition, whether it was upper respiratory or if it was a urinary tract infection, both conditions where they are desperate for new materials to replace the antibiotic-resistant treatments that are there and proving to be ineffective. So there's two excellent areas, and there's thousands, millions of doses that can be sold and administered every year, and that for an SME would give a great return. But I think it's the investors that probably would come to us are people who have a need and a desire and a wish to do something for mankind, do things that the big pharmaceutical companies aren't doing. We're not an antibiotic, our product. We come from different sources, and we work in different ways, and we're not an antibiotic company. Big Pharma, we work and think and behave in a different way to that. So people who want sustainable treatments and things that resistance probably will not be developed against, those people, that kind of people, that way of thinking, and with money in their pocket, of course, and a desire to make a profit, because we are going to sell lots and lots of doses of this because we're so effective. Okay, it's not a dose that somebody's taken every year for the rest of their every day, I should say, for the rest of their lives. But if we could treat a million people a year with, say, 2 doses, that's a phenomenal number, and that would generate us so much profit. We could sell the product for about £25, maybe a bit less, but it costs maybe £3 or £4 to make. That's a very good margin, very good margin indeed.
And what kind of returns do you think investors could expect if they did invest? And how would they go about investing in not necessarily just your company, but this kind of alternatives to antibiotics?
The antibiotics are failing. Not every antibiotic, let's be clear, but some big conditions like Clostridium difficile and gonorrhea and tuberculosis. The people are dying because there's no suitable antibiotic. The opportunity is enormous. The value of the antibiotic market worldwide is 50 billion. If you add on that's just for humans. If you add on to it animals, which is supposed to be bigger, so shall we say close on £100 billion a year. If we get 1% of that, that's £1 billion. And if I was to say to investors, I'm going to go from 0 to £1 billion, they thought I was crazy. At the same time, if I said to them, I'm only going for 1% of the market, they thought I had no ambition. But that's taking a different way of thinking, looking at just the finances, not just percentages and so forth. That would be phenomenal for us and for any investor, because I'm sure if we had... we're beyond startup, but if it's a late stage, for example, putting money in at that, and they come in, they've got private equity said, we only go in for 3 years or something, the change that they would see in the 3 years would be phenomenal. Remember, in the USA and in Europe, there are fast-track licensing programs in place because these replacements for antibiotics are so desperately needed. So that's why I think we could be to market at, say, 2 or 3 years, which is really very quick. We could get sales very quickly, and we start getting return of income. They would then be able to exit in the way that they like to exit, because when we've got a highly profitable company, other people will come in with money. So I see it as a very bright thing for investors.
And where can investors find out more information on your company, on the Ocean product, to learn more about this and potentially get in contact?
Well, as you kindly said, my product is called Ocean, an easy name to pronounce and to remember. But you can get more information on www.curesgroup.com, and Cures is spelt Qures, so curesgroup.com, and there's information on there. And we're preparing an investor page so that people come along, sign an NDA, they can go on, see the investor page of what we're going to do, what money we need, how we're going to spend it. And then if they become an investor, they go on to another page where they will be given more up-to-date information as we are moving along. We want to be as friendly to the investors as we can, and we would love investors that had some experience and would want to do things from the pharmaceutical industry, but would want to do things in a different way, because many pharmaceutical companies don't have the brightest reputations. Whether that's right or wrong, it's what I see as a situation. And if they can do things better and help us, because I'm not from the pharmaceutical industry, I'm a chemist, and help us go and penetrate the market, people like that with money and experience and time to help us, that would be great.
It's been a fascinating chat with you, Richard, because it sounds like as big as this problem is, the most resource companies are kind of ignoring it mainly because they're focusing their attention and resources on other areas. So it's potentially a very big opportunity for investors out there. Thanks for joining me on the show today, and best of luck with the investment.
That's great. Adam, thank you very much for this opportunity to share what we're doing and to invite people to come along and join us. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me on Modern Mindset in association with Share Radio. Join me again next week for more.